let's compare the S23 Ultra against the iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 14 Pro. And man, I did not expect this. Welcome everybody, welcome to AppleInsider. It is Andrew here, and it has been a couple weeks now since I've been using the S23 Ultra from Samsung. And I am not oblivious to the fact that you guys are watching a predominantly Apple channel. It's called AppleInsider, so clearly I'm more of an iPhone guy than anything. But I want you guys to always know, if I spot a better phone, I'm going to tell you. Whether that's a comparison among smartphones, whether we're comparing laptops or tablets, I'm going to be honest with you guys. And there are several ways that Samsung has kicked Apple's butt when comparing the S23 Ultra against the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the iPhone 14 Pro. So let's go ahead and talk about why the S23 Ultra is so incredible and how this is only going to be a good thing for future iPhones. Saying the S23 Ultra is better than the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max is not something I'm saying just lightly or haphazardly. I'm not saying it to garner views. There are tangible, measurable ways that this phone beats Apple's latest and greatest. Now, true, this is a few months older. We're about halfway through the phone cycle for the iPhone 14 Pros, and we're going to have iPhone 15 Pros out later this year. So this is a bit of a newer device, but still, Apple has some catch-up to do. Let's talk about some basic specs. The S23 Ultra has a custom Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 processor on the inside, compared to Apple, which is using an A16 Bionic. You can get up to a terabyte of storage inside of the S23 Ultra, and you can get up to a terabyte of storage in the iPhone 14 Pro. The S23 Ultra has a 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display that has a resolution of 3088 by 1440, which is a 500 ppi pixel density. The iPhone, on the other hand, the iPhone 14 Pro, has a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR display with a resolution of 2556 by 1179. And the iPhone 14 Pro Max, slightly larger, 6.7-inch display, still slightly smaller than the 6.8-inch on the S23 Ultra, but has a resolution of 2796 by 1290, again, a 460 ppi on both of these. This is one of the ways that the S23 Ultra wins out. Now, I don't have all the proper testing tools here in my studio, but Tom's guy does. And when they were measuring these displays, while they're both equally bright, the S23 Ultra is better at color reproduction and covers much more of the P3 wide color gamut than the iPhone 14 Pro does, or the iPhone 14 Pro Max. The S23 Ultra hit 112% natural and 193% of the vivid, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro Max only hit about 83%. For as much as Apple cares about displays, I'm honestly shocked that Samsung was actually able to beat Apple out in coverage of the P3 wide color gamut. Both the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max have Apple's Face ID as a biometric way of entering your phone. The S23 Ultra has an ultrasonic in-screen fingerprint reader as well as face unlock. Now, I would go and say that Apple's are likely more secure here just because of how Apple does their Face ID technology, but that is such a small point in the larger part of this comparison, so let's go ahead and move on to some finer details. The next way that Samsung wins out is the S23 Ultra supports Wi-Fi 6E. Apple still only supports Wi-Fi 6 on the iPhone 14 Pro line. Now, Apple has started to adopt Wi-Fi 6E on more recent devices, such as the new MacBook Pros, so it only makes sense that we will see Wi-Fi 6E in the next generation of iPhone, but right now, we're definitely seeing better performance and speed on the Wi-Fi networks thanks to the Wi-Fi 6E support on the S23 Ultra. Okay, it's camera time. One of the biggest differences between these two phones, and one of the ways that I am pleading for Apple to play catch up here. Samsung has multiple lenses on its phone. So one camera is the 200 megapixel main lens, a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, a 10 megapixel 3x optical zoom telephoto lens, and a 10 megapixel 10x optical zoom telephoto lens. Apple, on the other hand, has a 48 megapixel main sensor, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. Just because Samsung jams a bunch of extra megapixels into its primary sensor does not instinctually make it a better camera. But Samsung is doing a lot between that larger main sensor and its additional telephoto lenses to one-up Apple in a few important ways. And the biggest one for me is with telephoto. So Apple has only 3 times optical zoom, where Samsung can go much farther. They're able to have a 3 times and 10 times optical zoom lenses on its cameras, but it also has that 200 megapixel that you can zoom in on and then crop in when you need to, and you can even reframe a photo after the fact. You're able to get so much better zoom on the Samsung phone. Apple allows up to 15 times digital zoom, whereas Samsung gets you up to 100 times digital zoom on its photos. And they are far more usable than the previous ultra zoom photos that Samsung tried to pass off. These are legitimately, arguably, somewhat usable photos compared to what we had in the past. And if you're pulling that back even a little bit, it's still far better than what Apple is offering. I mean, you're getting optical zoom at 10 times versus only 3 times on the iPhone. 3 times the optical zoom basically out of the gate for Samsung when you don't even count the 200 megapixel primary sensor and some of the other stuff that they're doing. These photos look very, very good, and I am so impressed by this. I really want Apple not to just to focus on adding more megapixels, because I don't think that's the answer. It took a long time to get to the 48, but I think we can use with a higher resolution telephoto lens, whether you're adding more megapixels to be able to zoom in a little bit more, or whether we're looking at actually adding a 10 times optical zoom. But Apple's just getting its butt kicked here, and Samsung is taking full advantage of it between its marketing strategy and everything else that it's pushing out online. By the way, here are a few sample photos just so you can see more of the differences between these two photos. It's some really just common shots that I've been taking as we had like a little mini vacation. Okay, there are 2 other areas that I'm impressed by with the S23 Ultra. First, it's charging. You can go up to, I believe, over 40 watts, 40 or 45 watts of charging on the S23 Ultra, and Apple's capped at maybe 15 on the iPhone 14 line. Like, it is so much behind that. There's rumors, again, that an iPhone 15 series will go up to higher wattage charging via USB-C. There's also the people who will say that really fast charging can damage your battery life. For me, I upgrade my phone every year. I do not mind that there's going to be some degradation to battery life on the short term, but I'm a frequent upgrader. If that's not you, there definitely could be some compromises there. You don't have to use these high-speed charging every time, but at least it's an option, and I like that Samsung gives you that option to charge that just massive battery on the inside. Finally, the S23 Ultra has the built-in S Pen. Not everyone's going to need a stylus, but considering these phones are almost the same size, and Samsung is able to build in a whole stylus that you can use or not use, is really cool. I don't think I'd use a stylus all that much on my phone, but I've been trying to use it as I've been testing out the S23 Ultra, and there are times that it does come in handy. I just like being able to have it for those few times that I do want to use it. Historically, one of Apple's biggest strong suits is its silicon. It is creating its own silicon to go on these phones, and they're able to optimize things like the battery, the camera, the performance of the phone, down to the slowest level of the silicon on the phones it's creating. Samsung, on the other hand, is buying these chips off the shelf, but they are using this new custom Snapdragon processor that is pretty incredible. So if we're looking at Geekbench scores, there's not a huge difference here. The iPhone does win out. So on single core scores, we're looking at 1817 versus 2333, so definitely a win for the 14 Pro in general usability. Going to the multi-core, 4831 versus 5107. The iPhone is winning here in terms of raw performance, in terms of just, using your device for general stuff. But if we're turning to something more graphical, the iPhone loses, which is not something I usually get to say in these videos. And it shows that Apple really needs to do something special for the iPhone 15 Pro line. There were rumors that Apple just really struggled with the iPhone 14 Pro silicon, and it shows here. Looking at the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme, we're getting a score of 3817 for the S23 Ultra and only a 3157 for the iPhone 14 Pro. And if we're looking at the average frames per second, we got up to 22.9 on the S23 Ultra versus below 19 on the iPhone 14 Pro. This is notable. Like, if you're a big gamer, this is important to you. So Apple is actually lagging behind here in graphics performance, at least according to these benchmarks. I did pull up a few different games, and there was a little bit of a notice. The occasional snafu, occasional lag that you'd pop up on the iPhone 14 Pro that I wasn't seeing on the S23 line, but this is just giving me hope that Apple needs to do something for the iPhone 15 Pro to push this even further, because the competition is coming. So what do you guys think here? I think this is a huge deal that Apple is basically falling behind Samsung in a few key metrics in terms of graphics performance, charging abilities, wireless connectivity, the display quality, and the cameras. These are major parts of your iPhone. And I'm saying that from an Apple channel that loves my iPhone, and I love iOS versus Android, and I'm never gonna switch to Android because of the fact that I love the operating system here. But for people who are more agnostic and don't have as much of a preference, this is something Apple needs to be concerned about. I think this is only a good thing though, because to see the competition catching up means Apple is going to have to push even harder, have to innovate even faster, and I think we're going to see some really special stuff with the iPhone 15 line and the iPhone 16 line coming the year after that. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments or on Twitter at Andrew_OSU. Otherwise, stay tuned. I got a lot more videos coming your way.